Billy Graham was touring around one day and looking for the post office. Couldn't find it. Runs into a kid. He's going to do a revival later that day. He said, "Kid, can you help me find the post office in town? I'm new to town. I don't know where it is." Kid says, I'll jump in the car with you. I'll show you where it is." Because they drive around a couple turns, and they're at the post office. Billy Graham uses the moment, as you might imagine he would, to ask the kid if he knows how to get to heaven. Kid says, "I don't." He says, "Would you like to hear how you get to heaven?" Kid says, "I think I'll pass. You couldn't even find the post office." Give generously for the life and work of this church. Who's doing the basket? Someone.
The reading this morning is titled Freud and Pascal. Sigmund Freud says, "The question of the purpose of human life has been raised countless times. It has never yet received a satisfactory answer, and perhaps does not admit of one. We will therefore turn to the less ambitious question of what men show by their behavior to be the purpose and the intention of their lives. What do they demand of life and wish to achieve in it? The answer to this can hardly be in doubt. They strive after happiness. They want to become happy and to remain so. Blaise Pascal concurs. All men and women seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend towards this end. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the very motive of every action of every man. And perhaps by experience, most convincingly is Anne Frank, who says, "We all live with the objective of being happy. Our lives are all different and yet the same."
Thanks, Jeff. If the premise that everyone seeks this elusive thing we call happiness is true, I think we can generally say that, right? I think it's true. We might, in the best modern sense, as investigators, as scientists, have to determine that the chief suspects for what humans aim to get would have to be the choices and the behaviors that most people choose to engage in their lives if we are to pursue happiness. So in order to solve the mystery of what makes us happy, I've invited in Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert, author of a book called Stumbling Towards Happiness, onto the case. And for fun, I'm going to set our own pursuit of happiness and what might make us happy in the frame of an old kind of detective novel. I encourage you to think of the rest of this sermon in black and white. I'm putting on my detective coat. Our pursuit of this most elusive thing begins with Professor Gilbert walking into my detective's office, an armful of studies, books, most importantly, a deep respect for the difficulty of finding the source of happiness. Gilbert and I in our office start brainstorming. In order to find happiness, we back and forth sort of go quickly through, in no particular order, the suspect of behaviors and patterns of living that people do, presumably to get happy. I say, just getting us the ball rolling, I say people try to find love and to surround themselves with people that love them. Gilbert marks that down in his little book. He adds, people try to make more money, get more things, get more security. Brilliant, I say. They also seek more power and status, I say. And, interestingly enough, I add, they also give up those pursuits for a simpler, more comfortable life. Good observation, Gilbert says, and adds that people also ingest drugs, both strong and mild, prescribed and otherwise, in order to find it. Right, I add. They also redefine reality, whether accurately or not, to realms outside of which can normally be seen. Gilbert says, huh? I say, by I mean they change their perspective beyond the here and now. They get religious, they get faith. Gilbert and I decide to start our pursuit for where happiness lives in the same way that many people initially do, and in many of the ways that Buddha initially did, by first testing our most tantalizing of leads. In order to determine what we do that, we quickly catch cheap flights to Vegas. In Sin City, we watch people try to break the casino, ingest the right drug, something Mr. Freud would certainly understand, and or to find Mr. and Mrs. or Mrs. Right. Dan Gilbert lifts his head to say, or at least Mr. and Mrs. Right now. Walking by the fountains and the wide sidewalks, Gilbert and I discussed that there's a pulse in the air here in Vegas. We, without much effort, concur that the route to happiness Vegas offers might in fact be the quickest way to find it. And with many shiny, pretty things to engage us and play with, there is a certain levity that's in the air. There's a certain sort of easiness that we catch ourselves up, find ourselves caught in. Gilbert and I boldly concur that happiness, or at least the elevation of our spirits and our body chemistry, can be found here to a degree. However, after only a couple long days of being in Vegas, we realized that our observations also lead us to the conclusion that the stressed out and the despondent faces that many people have from their drugs and excitement and failed hopes of games of chance and the pretty lights do not appear to be a very certain way to stay happy for very long. Standing in the neon glare, I note in my little detective book for later, it is worth noting that people are driven hard enough to find happiness that they pursue short-term solutions long past the point that appears to be good for them. Gilbert says, okay, the quick-fix connections and fast money and cheap love may be eliminated as a good and long-term source of happiness, but we still need to check the connection between happiness and more stable money and resources. I pretend in a tough guy talk, I say, let's check out the next suspect. Gilbert and I, trench coats and magnifying glasses, figuratively in hand, decide the best way to test the connection between happiness and money is to test a variety of poor and wealthy communities. We hop planes to the barren deserts of Ethiopia, where people have next to nothing. We go to the shiny shopping malls of Dubai, the homes on the coast of Malibu, some of the slums in Philippines, poor and wealthy communities, some of the classic middle-class suburbs of Chicago. We're trying to create a sample. From the beautiful street-lined streets of Malibu to the crowded ones of Manila, we take it all in. Me wondering and talking to people, the diligent professor frequently drops his gaze down back into his briefcase and his notes. With one of our plane flights home from one of these places, I say, Dan, this is a tough one. But what my eye and guts tells me is that the people that live in poor nations that are struggling for basic things can generally feel a little bit less secure and relaxed. I'm just going to go ahead and say less happy than those in moderately wealthy nations. Just throwing it out there, I say. This is, of course, subjective, but varied to realize that money is at least somewhat correlated with happiness. Gilbert interrupts me. Steve, you're right. The data does loosely support those common sense observations we've just gathered. Those who seem to spend their time struggling to meet their basic needs don't even self-identify on surveys as happy as those with more security. However, he adds, when you look at the slew of studies, and he's pouring them all over our little tables in the plane, the facts also support that the wealthy are not significantly happier than those who have their basic needs at least met. Gilbert, looking over a slew of studies, says that the facts show a correlation between happiness up to the point that one's basic material needs and security are met. But after that, after one reaches that stability, there's a steady diminishing correlation between happiness and how much material wealth you have. To which I respond, so believing you can buy your way out of sick, tired, and hungry, scared even, not entirely an illusion. No, he jumps in, that's true. One might suggest from this conclusion of our tour and the background research done on money and happiness that it appears that money and the security it can bring can help us keep us from the conditions that prevent us from being unhappy without granting us the ability to truly gain happiness in the positive. Well phrased, I say, repeating it. Money can keep us from the conditions that prevent us from being unhappy without necessarily granting us much of the capacity to be happy. I scratch in my notebook. Although there's an undeniable pervasive evidence that money does buy happiness, people of all economic backgrounds still hunger after money. Why is that? Gilbert interrupts my thought by urging us to attend to the next suspect. I turn to Gilbert and say, I believe finding romantic love is nearly a surefire way to get, if not stay, happy. Gilbert responds, that's a good suspect. Romantic love is a source of at least temporary happiness, and in fact, if the person you've tagged your title with of your partner or lover doesn't initially make you happy, you've probably picked the wrong person. I say, Dan, let's assume for a minute that people are not always picking the wrong person, and that there's at least a percentage of people who fall in love and get married and at least someone close to the right person. That seems reasonable, he says. Then I say, let's find out whether the right person in the security of partnership, and while we're at it, the kids that often come from it make us happy. Okay, Gilbert says. That's a choice most people make in their lives. And as if we started out with everyone is pursuing happiness, love and family are really good places to look. We begin walking these suburban middle-class streets, peeking in windows with families of all shapes and sizes. We walk into different neighborhoods. We survey the scene. We find ourselves sitting beneath a lamp on the side of the street. He pulls out his laptop. We're on the curb. It seems, I say, that the closest thing to a conclusion here is that marriages and families differ in their ability to deliver happiness to those involved. Gilbert responds, look at the combination of what these 4 studies show. He scatters them out across the sidewalk. Gilbert chimes in, there's more. Check this out. It is true, parents record a trustworthy pleasure, I believe we can call happiness, when they look wistfully back or forward with glee on cooing babies and wedding days and Susie's first time at bat. Yes, I say. But, he says, in the day-to-day moment we actually live in, Gilbert goes on, it seems that when happiness is measured in the everyday journey of people taking care or spending time with their children and spouses, parents in this study rank the pleasure of being with their kids somewhere between housework and exercise. He goes on. In sum, the evidence reveals people generally describe their kids as a source of joy and happiness, even a point of pride and purpose, but not right now. Right, I follow, chuckling. So looking at him, I say for some confirmation, it won't be finding a spouse or having kids that will make you happy. Seems that way, Gilbert responds. We find ourselves walking by a synagogue, which prompts me to say, the traditional religious answer, at least, in the Western world, is that the very source of happiness is in our innate connection to a more perfect existence, a heavenly realm, a relationship with God, or gods. There is and has been a persistent human belief, I say, that there's a more divine place, a more perfect version of ourselves that traditionally, religiously, we can come from or we can fight to achieve. Gilbert says it sort of seems like with the eyes and heart of faith that we can taste. Yes, I say. Traditional religious answer is that our problem of finding happiness, holding on to it, is that we're built of both spirit and matter, and we fall prey to being pursued by the lowly, the worldly pursuits of things, the lower realm concerns. We are corrupted, so to speak, as we in the world take material shape, is a common theme in religions. Gilbert says, in this mindset, if I've got you right there, Pastor, true happiness is built upon cultivating a deeper relationship with this eternal realm, right? Yes, I respond. Gilbert looks back clearly. This could be true. And I say, it's of course hard to test this. Let's put faith and all of that likely off to the side, not claimed as a suspect, but neither eliminated as one either. I like that, we both say. There's something rich and deep about the connection with people finding what they think of as religion and getting happy, but it is hard to test. We return to the office. I put my feet up on the desk like I do, a little frustrated with the lack of clarity we found. Gilbert stands above me, fuddling with all his files and data. Got them all over the place. Exasperated, I say, almost repeating the problem. If we all want to be happy, and nothing people seem to choose consistently leads to happiness, Gilbert jumps in, something's wrong. Right, I say musingly. Gilbert says, we found out, as we might have always suspected, that the behaviors, the pursuits, the things, and even the people that we gather around us to give us happiness is not the same as happiness itself. Yes, Dan says, good point. Let's deal only with those people who have the resources to get to the place where they're not living in a desperate spot and pursue the things that think they will make them happy. Okay, then Gilbert begins to nod slowly. An enlightened smile crosses his face. In an instant, he's leaving me emotionally. He begins to shuffle papers and paste things around my office, frantically ignoring me. He mutters under his breath repeatedly, we think will make us happy. We think will make us happy. The things we pursue. He's on to something. I jump out for a cup of coffee. Let the genius do his work. I come back. He's got a sly smile on his face. I got it. At least I think I got it, he says. He says, when you look at all we found in the studies and the way our brains and the world works, it seems that there's an odd but missing thing to know about happiness we mostly miss. What? I say. Quit holding out. Sit down, he says. This is a bit odd. Gilbert says, we are much less likely, and by that I mean we are much, much, much less likely to be capable of making choices that we think will make us happy than we think we can. Huh. I say puzzled. Can you say that again? He says, we are much less likely, and by that I mean much less likely and capable of making the choices that in the future will make us happy than we think we can or do. Okay, still slightly confused. Gilbert says, as it turns out, the future is far too unpredictable for our capacity to predict and make a fundamental difference in casting ourselves forward into the future. Huh? Gilbert says, our skills, come on, wake up, he says, our skills in predicting, never mind navigating our future selves to what will make us happy, is too weak to work in the future to make us happy, that is. Gilbert runs around showing me all this data that he's pinned up all over my wall. Look at the data. Our happiness, which we think is inclined to be attached to a thing or to someone or to things, is even in the fulfillment, seems to be actually more dependent, more connected to the pleasure of aiming at those things than getting them. Huh, I shrug. Happiness is built more on the hope than the achievement of our target, Gilbert says. The studies, when compiled with the happiness question in mind, tend to reveal an interesting thing. It seems that for our brains, it is simply gratifying to exercise the combination of hope and control. I twist my head like a dog, trying to really capture it. He says the act of steering one's own life, like a captain might find the pleasure of steering his or her boat, is in itself a source of pleasure. He goes on to make the point even clearer. Regardless of what one's point of call might be, or whatever anyone might choose to pursue, the rudder in our own hand feels good. We like control, I say. Happiness has something to do with control, I state. Yeah, that rings true. Yeah, but it's not just that, Gilbert says. We enjoy thinking about the future. For example, look at this study. It's got pinned on my wall. Most people, when asked whether they want to eat a fancy meal, do they want to do it now, soon, or later? Most people choose to planning eating that fancy meal about a week away. Gilbert says, I've come to believe they do this because this is a choice that offers them time to absorb the pleasure of looking forward to that event that comes even minus the taste of the food. He goes on. He's clearly on a roll, so I just listen. It's been assessed here, pointing to a graph that he's got taped to the water cooler, that our brains spend about 12% of their times thinking about the future. Our brains also have a tendency, he says, an inclination to imagine good things happening in the future much more than they actually do. Cool, I say, kind of grasping where he's headed. This, he says, is because our brains are sneaky and silent about their own pursuit of happiness. They're conniving. Our brains are involved in a conspiracy of selectively remembering the things that are happy that have happened to us, and likewise become overly optimistic that our expectations of what will happen will actually happen and feel good. He says the evidence is in why and how we fill our photo albums with birthday parties and not breakups with tears. Huh, okay. Dan follows, it's in our brain's self-interest and it's in its tendency to think that good things are going to happen more often than they actually do. Someone told me, I say to him, that happiness is found in the waiting room for happiness. I never really got that till now. Gilbert interjects with enthusiasm. Our memory, which both courts and magicians have long ago proven to be untrustworthy, and our imaginations about what is to come, which, by the way, is forced to deal with literally tons of missing information, as we all know, that our future hasn't obviously brought us yet, both about who we will be and what the circumstances will be, is forced to leave out important information as it sets its course without ever telling us it has to do so. Okay, I slide in. Uninterrupted, Gilbert says, we tend to be overly optimistic in our expectations and that our interests today will also be what we're interested in the future. Think about the kid, he says, holding up his fingers in quotation, who will be so psyched when they can drive. Are you, he asked me, eyebrows furrowed, psyched each day that you can drive? No, I'm not making my own quotations back at him. But I want to say that the capacity, or right, I don't want that taken away. Exactly, Gilbert says, pointing with a smile. I understand that you're telling me that our brains sort of fool us into believing that what we want in the future is what we think we want in the future, when it cannot realistically know what it wants in the future. Right, he says. But now that that deconstruction is complete, I say, what's next? The facts seem to statistically believe that we believe things to be true that we do not in reality find true. Some of this appears in our ego's quite defensiveness about setting our own goals and holding them, but we also, in a way, provide ourselves with bad training. Say more, I respond. Gilbert says, I think we've all experienced that we shoot for transient pleasures. And like a sage might say, looking for unlimited happiness in limited things is a dead end. I say that's sort of true. I can be absolutely convinced that theoretically the next material thing or pretty person around the corner is not going to make me happy for any length of time, and yet it's still the place that I turn and want to find things. Gilbert says the first thing, if not the most important thing, is to know that in a society cultivating an insatiable desire for more and better, it is in fact counterintuitive to us to find happiness. We have to fight for it. That's a pretty important caution to remember, I say. For example, for our economy to thrive, at least in what we think of as thriving economy would be, the system is dependent upon the cultivation that more money, more stuff will buy us happiness. So we're competing against our own instincts and against the culture we live in. I stand up and say, you mean to be that via advertisements, obviously, but also through the other stories we tell ourselves, we're providing ourselves with constantly moving targets? Moving targets, he says, that's good. Going on. But money and the accumulation of things is not the only thing that brings with it the power of its own conviction. Some of the science about partnering in kids and all the rest is on its own wheel of reinforcement as well. Something like that, Gilbert says. But don't be too cynical. Happiness can, in part, come from money, good relationships, family, all those things, and all that they can bring. I say, might bring, not will bring. Yes, he says, that's true. Then there seems to be a reliable happiness is probably best pursued by a shift or a mental discipline or a jump in consciousness. You're the theologian, he says. It's a spiritual truth of so many traditions, not to get caught up, Gilbert adds. It might be wise to suggest that your parishioners, the next time they think some new place or thing will make them happy, remind them that it only might make them happy. Got it, I say. It makes me wonder if my grandfather, one of the happiest people I've known, kept at least an eye on what he decided he wanted in order to ensure that his wants didn't get out of hand with his happiness. Gilbert says, enjoying the control he actually had over pursuing the things that he was capable of getting seems to have worked. I say, I need a minute. I turn to my little detective book. In the end, I write, it's quite clear that after pursuing happiness by following it down its most obvious needs, beautiful boulevards, lavish homes that promise it, tracing its footsteps into romantic getaways, and peeking into the windows of homes with marriages good and bad and playful broods of kids, we find strong evidence that happiness can live there, can be found there. But it lives there only to the degree of the subjective realities and the trained hopes of the people who are there continue to hold those things to be satisfying. Well said, Gilbert says. And I think that's as close as we're going to get today. Much as we might quietly wish to chase it elsewhere, happiness, if anywhere, lives beneath our ears and inside our chest in the invisible place where our attitude and our emotional life meets our circumstances. Elementary, my dear Gilbert, I say. Jefferson and the boys said happiness was something not that we had the right to, but that we had the right to pursue. Maybe they were on to something in that phrasing. Amen. Let's sing. Something. Spirit of life. 1, 2, 3. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart, shine blue in the wind, in the sea. Closing words come from things I've seen on bumper stickers. Don't postpone joy. The more you know, the less you need. And go manifest your destiny, dream, rudder your ships. Go in peace, be peace. Does it go now? No. We can depart to Farrell if we want. And we also welcome in Corinne and Heather today. Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here.
You want to sneak in a joy or concern? Either of you two? Good to have you.
Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. Let's leave with that.